this bill actually attempts to undo some things that are given in our system, including the corporate veil, the notion that people who engage in business and commerce need protection from liability, so they establish corporations, they establish limited liability corporations, and business entities actually do operate and own property. The idea that we must tie that back in every case to an individual is kind of a new thing. And I understand that, this has become kind of in vogue and popular because there's been some recent activity, even right here in Connecticut, where we had a tragedy in Rocky Hill where some apartment buildings were not prepared for the cold of this past winter, which was quite a rough one. And they had a lot of pipes break, and people ended up not being able to stay in their apartments. It was kind of a disaster. But at the end of the day, there was a property management company in charge and responsible for those repairs. And the owner, while ultimately being responsible, doesn't have the knowledge, ability, or know-how to be able to run down there and fix a pipe. They've hired a property management company for that purpose. It's also a little ironic because I know that even this year and in previous years, this legislative body, the majority, continues to propose legislation to hide the residential addresses of various public employees. We've had proposals from everything from obvious situations like law enforcement where you might want to protect the identity of people, although I might note that we're going to talk about a bill later today where we're purposely undoing something that is given as a protection for people who serve in law enforcement because of the risk that they might face if people knew their home address. We've had the employees of the Attorney General's office asking for this protection. We have had teachers. I believe we're going to see a bill this session that would hide the residential addresses of public employees of different types, college professors, you name it. So it's completely ironic to me that here we are, people that serve in the public sector who are voluntarily employed by the state of Connecticut or a municipality, knowing full well that they're working for their neighbors, and that part of the deal is that your neighbors should know who you are because they're your boss. So we have Connecticut Sunlight. We have a lot of different other ways that you can go and track state employees and know who they are. And that's a good thing, because I do believe that if you talk about transparency and accountability, that is a factor, is making sure that people have access to know who's actually working for them at the state level. So to see a bill come forward that says that we want to tell people that are in the private sector that you must declare your private personal information is a little bit hypocritical, frankly. And I don't know how anyone could argue against it. But I just want to ask a few questions about this, because I'm really not certain after reading through this just how expansive this proposed change in our current law is. So through you, Madam President, a question to the proponent of the bill, if I could.
Please proceed, sir.
The first thing I'd like to know is who this applies to. Does this apply to any non-resident landlord? And by that, I'm asking, I understand that maybe this is targeted, and I've heard the discussion. It's kind of described as maybe out-of-state non-resident landlords that own a lot of commercial property, that have hundreds of units and things like that. But would this apply to someone who owns just one unit, a single-family house, for example, through you?
Senator Rahman.
Thank you, Madam President. Yes, it is applied for any non-resident landlord. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and I appreciate that answer. Now, when a landlord and a tenant get together, they form an agreement we know as a residential lease, but that's a private contract. And that private contract will stipulate who the parties are in the agreement. What if the person actually renting the property is not the owner? Maybe it's a property management company who is actually doing the renting. In that case, would it be sufficient under this language to provide the property management company's information through you?
Thank you, Senator Rahman.
Yes. Through you, Madam President, thank you. Yes, point of contact must providing their contact information to the town, then tenant can contact with their landlord.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
And thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate the good chairman's comments, although he didn't answer my question, which is the point of contact that I see referenced in the bill describes the owner of the property. But many leases are written where the parties involved in the transaction are the tenant and a property management company. So the point of contact in the lease agreement would be the property management company. And I'm asking if that's sufficient, or does this bill require, even in a case where it's a property management company that is entering into the lease agreement and responsible for the upkeep, maintenance, and negotiations on the property on a day in and day out basis, would you still be demanding the residential address of the owner of the building through you?
Thank you, Senator Rahman.
Through you, Madam President, the point of contact could be entity or management company. Whoever the point of contact, they must provide the point of contact information to the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Well, I appreciate that answer, except I don't think it's accurate. Can the good gentleman point to me where in the bill it says that the point of contact providing the residential address is the business entity through you?
Thank you, Senator Rahman.
Through you, Madam President, line 26, section 6, identifying information means proof of an individual, names, date of birth, the current residential address, motor vehicles, license numbers, and other identification numbers issued by any government agency or entity. Item 30, section 7, non-resident owner means in any individual, corporation, partnership, trust, or other legally. So the item 30, section 7. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate that. And I have read the same exact section of the bill, but I think that this language is explicit, that it is actually suggesting that a non-resident owner could be all of those entities, but the controlling participant is who we're actually talking about. So we're not talking about the property management company in my example. We're talking about the owner of the building. I want to be very clear about this, that this bill goes beyond any corporate veil. It goes beyond the property management company that is actually responsible for maintaining and managing this property and dealing with the tenant as far as a day-to-day operation goes, and says we must have the owner's information. So please just confirm for me that I have this correct through you.
Thank you, Senator Rahman.
Through you, Madam President, if you go item line 43, owner or project-based housing provider of such property, if the non-residence owner or project-based housing provider is an individual or the current residence address, agent in charge of the building if they are non-residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate the response, but again, I'm going by the language of the bill. The bill is very clear on lines 18 through 20. It talks about controlling participant, and that's who's ultimately we are looking for their information. And the controlling participant means an individual. That's an individual. That's a person. I would also ask, how does a corporate entity or a property management company have a date of birth? Through you.
Thank you, Senator Rahman.
Through you, Madam President, yes.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I asked a question. How does a property management company have a date of birth? Through you.
Thank you, Senator Rahman.
Maybe stand you 1 second. Maybe.
Thank you, Senator Rahman.
Standing on the.
We'll stand at ease for a moment. Thank you. We will come back to order. And Senator Rahman, would you like to answer the question, sir?
Thank you, Madam President. Would you be so kind to repeat your question again?
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We seem to have a little disagreement about what the bill says. My understanding is that the reason why this bill is here is because the majority or the proponent of the bill is not satisfied with the current law, which basically would say that the lease, the private contract between the parties in the agreement, the lessor and the tenant, would put their contact information or their property management contact information or whoever they deemed appropriate in that agreement, and that would control the communication between the parties. And this bill, in my view, is intended to supersede that, to say the private contract notwithstanding, you are now required as a non-resident owner of rental property in the state of Connecticut to provide your residential address, your date of birth, your driver's license information. So if that's all true, what I'm confused about is the good chairman suggesting that no, you could actually use the property management company as the controlling participant. And I don't believe the bill reads that way. So I would just like to get it on the record that I'm correct, that the bill refers to the individual owner, not the property management company. Through you.
Thank you, Senator Rahman.
Through you, Madam President, thank you. So, item 49, line 49, clearly saying owner or project-based housing providers are, provider is a owner or corporation, partnership, trust, or other legally recognized entity. Owning rental in the properties, the either management companies or owner, non-resident owners, either ones, any contacts, they must provide the contact information to the town.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate the good gentleman and his effort to go through the bill with me, but if he continues the same paragraph on the next several lines, 51 through 53, 54, something like that, It says, yes, that the non-resident owner can be those entities, but it says such report shall also include identifying information and the current residential address. Okay, you can't have a residential address for a business entity of each controlling participant associated with the property. If you go back to what a controlling participant means, it talks about the individual who exercises day-to-day financial and operational control. So let me just ask these questions then. If we can't get to that at least simple understanding what the bill does, and I'll be frank with the people listening, the conversation we're having makes no sense at all, because we don't need this bill unless it's doing what I'm suggesting, because that's already the current situation. When a lease is drafted between the parties, it says in there who the tenant can contact, and the tenant can contact whoever the leasing agent is. That could be the owner. They might just put their name and address on it, or they might hire a property management company or a real estate company or someone else. Not to mention the fact that there are many different types of owners in this world. Could be a single person, could be a partnership, it could be 50 people, it could be a real estate investment trust with thousands of people that own fractions of a share. That's another part of this conversation we haven't even gotten to yet. But if you're going to talk about the residential address, that means a person's address, right? And it doesn't mean, in my view, the residential address of the management company's CEO. It means the owner of the property. So I'm just curious, what is the need of all this information? Why do we need that residence address of the owner? Why do we need his date of birth, or hers, through you?
Thank you, Senator Rahman.
Through you, Madam President, I just want to clear again the line 50, corporation, partnership, trust, or other legally recognized entity who's responsible this property or managing the property must provide the contact information to the town for the tenants. The same application apply for tenant when tenant apply for the for renting the property. An application said tenant must providing their address, date of birth, social securities, and more. So, but a tenant providing all their private information to get approval for the apartment. At the same time, but most time that we see the tenant can reach the landlord, and either the fire code problems of the property, or the leakings, or roof, blow, whatever it is, they can reach out their landlord to fix their issue or mold the property for livable. And I think it's fair to say, my good senator, if it's tenant providing their all private information, social securities, date of birth, their home address, current resident address, whatever it is, am I right? So they are entitled to, and I think it's fair to have landlord contact informations, then they can appropriately contact with a landlord to fixing their issues or sending the also rents in the more. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. And I appreciate the gentleman trying to explain the what I think are laudable goals of what is before us, which is to make sure that tenants have recourse. I could not agree more, through you, Madam President. The problem is that this bill is not doing any of that. This bill doesn't give anyone any recourse. And I would just suggest that the statements made by the good chairman are not altogether accurate either. I mean, there's no requirement in the law that the tenant provides their date of birth or their social security number. Now, it happens as a matter of practice because to apply for a loan or a rental agreement that requires payments over a period of time, there's an expectation that you've got to prove your ability to do so. The landlord doesn't have an obligation to prove their financial stability to the tenant. It's the other way around. Just like when you go into Walmart to buy a can of paint or anything else, that you're not entitled to the CEO's private information. You're not. So this bill doesn't make any sense from a lot of standpoints. First off, it's a private contract we're talking about between the parties. The state of Connecticut's got no business interfering with it. Now, I understand the desire to put in protections for the parties, and I'm with you on that. And we should even increase the penalties for people that engage in bad business practices that harm tenants. I got no problem with that. Come up with some bills for that. But what we're doing here is unworkable and frankly stupid. I mean, I don't think I've used that word in this room before, but it's just stupid. This is a stupid bill. Okay? Can I just ask, what defines an owner through you, Madam President? And I'm going to, before I even go on, I just want to say, I'm talking about line 71, non-resident owner. What defines that owner through you?
Thank you, Senator Rahman.
Through you, Madam President, before I go the line 71 answer, I just want to share with with my good senator, if any tenant apply for apartment, most time landlord or a management company, they check backgrounds and also they credit report, all those items is there. For that reason, most times require their address, phone numbers, their date of birth, and social security. For that reason, I share that. And as for the line 71, non-resident owner, project-based housing provider, or agent in charge. I know I mentioned this like fifth time. I want to make sure my good senator understand, is the person in charge and point of contact, either agent or non-resident owners or anyone. They must provide to the town, not the tenant, their contact information to contact if they need it appropriately. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate the good senator and his response and him taking the time to explain a little bit more of the bill. I certainly want to get my questions answered as a priority, but I don't object to him explaining his reasons for the support of the bill, except that every time I hear the good senator comment, it creates another question for me. He's concerned that somehow tenants are required to provide a lot of personal information to the landlord during an application process, and I already explained that there was a reason for that. When you go to rent a car, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, you give them a lot of information, right? But the guy who runs Enterprise Rent-A-Car is not required to give you anything, right? And there's reason for that, okay? Because you're borrowing their car, right? That's the reason. And when you're talking about a landlord-tenant relationship, you're borrowing the property owner's property. That's why they have a reason to be asking for information. But what's ironic, once again, is that the majority doesn't seem to have a problem with requiring the private information of the property owner to be made entirely public. Okay, because that's what happens, because now, as he pointed out, you've got to give that information to the municipality. And now it becomes a public record. So now we're not even talking about the tenant providing specific information to the landlord. We're talking about how the property owner now has to provide information to the world. So these things are not equal or fair, and I still want to get to the bottom of what is the definition of an owner. Because a single individual can own a property, for sure, but so can a partnership, so can 2 people, so can 5 people, so can a real estate investment trust where there's a lot of people who may not even know that they have ownership in an individual property because they just bought some stocks or a mutual fund, and they own 1/10 of 1% of one share of one real estate investment trust company that owns 100 properties? Is that person an owner in this bill? Because I see no distinction made about the level of ownership. We had a similar bill in the Housing Committee, and it said you had to have 10% ownership, at least, in the property, which to me is also absurd, but this has no requirement. So presumably anyone who owns a share of that stock, or even a portion of a share, is now an owner that is subject to this bill. I just got through saying a few minutes ago it was unworkable and it's stupid, and I just wish that people were listening to me, because I feel like I'm not getting anywhere with anyone actually paying attention to what I'm saying when I'm actually pointing out that this bill is completely, utterly unworkable. It makes no sense. It's not a realistic bill. Maybe it was put forward for political purposes because we want to highlight some bad actor landlords. No problem. I'm willing to help you. Senator, let's get together. Let's find a way to punish these people. But this bill, stupid, unworkable. I'll ask very clearly, what defines ownership? Do you have to be a majority owner? And if so, where in the bill does it show what the specific requirements are for ownership? Through you.
Thank you, Senator Rahman.
Yeah. Through you, Madam President, controlling participant. Controlling, I mentioned like 5 times, Senator. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I apologize to the senator if he's getting frustrated with me, but what defines a controlling participant?
Thank you, Senator Rahman.
Through you, Madam President, controlling the maybe entity or not the, controlling so ownerships, non-residence owner or partner who's managing and has the controlling powers. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I just want to point out that the controlling participant language that shows up in lines 18 through 20 is very clear. It says the person who exercises day-to-day financial or operational control. That would make a lot of sense. That only applies to, as far as I can read in this bill, information that has to be provided to the tenant. The information that has to be provided to the town is included in lines 65 to 71, and there's no mention of controlling participant there. I don't believe that tracks back to the controlling participant. I think that simply is the requirement for the residential address. And if I'm wrong, I would love to hear the good chairman explain to me how we are using the term non-resident owner in here without any definition of what requires or determines ownership. Is it a percentage of ownership? Is it a complete of ownership? Do you have to be an owner that's also a controlling participant? I looked for all this language through you, Madam President. I tried to find anything in here that would put these pieces together in a sensible way. But this bill is here for political reasons. This bill is not here because it's good policy. It's here because some folks on the majority think that it's a great idea to go ahead and whack around corporate landlords or whatever, and maybe it is. And I completely agree that people that fail and don't take care of the tenants ought to be punished, and we should be coming up ways to do that. But this bill is not doing that. This bill is inconveniencing a lot of people. It also applies to even a guy that owns one property. A couple that moved to Florida and they kept their condo in Connecticut and they rent it out. That's what we're doing here. And we're going to expose owners of property to having their public information released to the world. And I just don't see that that is a beneficial thing to do. It's also, in my mind, completely crazy to not only require how to contact them. Okay, we need their address. Okay, but what do you need their date of birth for? Do you know that our voter rolls in the state of Connecticut, they don't even allow people to see people's date of births anymore. You can only see the month and the year. Because the majority here is constantly concerned with protecting people's privacy, as am I. Okay? But they're not concerned with protecting this person's privacy. You are suddenly not going to be given the same rights as other people because you're a landlord. Now your information has to be plastered all over, right? And the other thing is that it says driver's license. You can cast a ballot in the state of Connecticut without a driver's license. And in fact, you can cast a ballot without any proof of information at all. But can you own property? I don't know, because it looks like as a non-resident owner, you have got to provide your date of birth, your resident address, not a P.O. box, not good enough, and you got to provide your driver's license. This is a pitifully poorly drafted bill with bad policy in it, ladies and gentlemen. That's what this bill is. It's garbage, frankly. If we want to address the problem that the good senator mentioned half a dozen times in our conversation, let's address the problem. Let's come up with a mechanism that actually punishes bad actors. Let's find a way to make it a crime. Okay? Or give some cause of action for civil liability if a landlord refuses to respond to a tenant's concerns. By the way, all those things already do exist in law in some factor or some way, but we could improve upon that. I have no objection. I also want to just say a word about the penalties portion of this bill, which in theory makes a lot of sense. If you have people that are repeating at failing to make repairs, and they've been fined for not keeping their properties up, this would increase the penalties for doing so. And it's fine. I don't really object to that portion of the bill, except I just want to remind people about we should be trying to make policy that is workable too. There's a few things I would say. The first one is that there are certainly situations where you might have a landlord who's struggling, okay? And they can't afford to make the repairs to the property. And if we're preventing them from making the repairs because you're putting more and more fines on them, that's not really solving the problem. The goal is to get the building back into a state of repair. That should be factored into this conversation, but it's not. And the other thing is that we had a similar bill in the Housing Committee, and I happened to have a member of the town council from the city of Bridgeport there testifying in favor of either the similar bill or some other housing bill. And I took the opportunity to ask them, say, look, what's the story? We hear about people who live in the big cities primarily, although I suppose it can happen anywhere, but in Bridgeport, New Haven in particular, where these buildings are in a poor state of repair and the landlord's not fixing it and everything else. And I asked, I said, do you have a public health person? Do you have a building inspector? Are you sending them out? I mean, what kind of budget do you have? She knew nothing. Absolutely nothing. I'm not going to mention any names here, but she knew nothing. She couldn't answer a single one of my questions. So, I really think you got to go back and look at these towns. The people that live in the city of Bridgeport really ought to be considering who they're electing to run their city government, and they should be choosing wisely to put people in place that are actually going to protect their interests, and if that means making sure that there is action taken to make sure that landlords uphold their end of the bargain and provide a nice place to live, that's how you do it. You don't do it through this, frankly, insane and circuitous route where you're exposing people's private information who really are not in a position to do something about it. The thought was nice. I'll give you that. You get credit for the thought of this bill, but in practice, it's not workable. It's only going to create more problems. And I can guarantee you, we can come back a year from now, through you, Madam President, we can come back a year from now, and I'm going to promise you that the situation will not be different. The situation is not going to be different. This is not going to fix it. Suddenly, tenants are not going to have a panacea. They're not going to have any problems with their landlords anymore. They're all going to be penalized. They're all going to be fixed. Everything's going to be great, and all the private addresses are going to solve everything. It's not going to happen. So I understand it's a nice show for political purposes. Look, we care. I care too. But I care enough to actually want to make a good law, not an unworkable, stupid one. I'll be a no today. Thank you.
Thank you.